Good afternoon. Friends, my name is Ted Cole. I'm one of the priests here at St. John's. And we're going to begin our service a little late, but very short. It is a privilege for us to be with you all here to celebrate Keith's life. And it's heartbreaking. And there's also much to lift up. So, as we get ready, I invite you to, if you haven't already, take your phones and make sure that they are silenced on you to kind of preserve the sanctity of the space that we'll share here together. Some of you have already figured out that the restrooms, should you need them, are in the preschool, which is to my right. No, now I'm facing you. To your right, my left, up the ramp and down the stairs. And we'll say this again, but after the service, there'll be a gathering at the old Reno house. So we hope you're here to stay safe and to continue what will begin a time of remembrance and celebration and shared comfort and sadness from this moment. So please sit tight, and we'll begin in just a few minutes.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this celebration of the life of Thomas Keith Blackwell. On behalf of us at St. John's, it is a privilege to be with you all to celebrate an extraordinary person, and we have the privilege of getting to know him through you. And this is part of the mystery of life. We hold in this space the hope that life is more than we see, and the sorrow we feel is not the end of the story. We pray that as this service unfolds, you might feel the fullness of that in your own hearts and lives. To those of you joining us on YouTube on this occasion, we are deeply grateful that you are extending your time, your love, and your attention into this space to celebrate Keith's life alongside all of us gathered here. There was a plan for a bulletin to be in your hands, and as we know, things don't always work out as we planned, but we make do. We are going to begin with one of the classic readings from English literature, from the Book of Common Prayer, the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, the King James, actually it's from the King James Bible, not from the Book of Common Prayer, but you're going to find it in the Book of Common Prayer, which is in the seat pockets in front of you. It's the small red book with the gold cross on the cover. I'm going to invite you to open those books up to page 476. Some of you may be of a generation that you don't need to have the text of the 23rd Psalm of the King James Version in front of you. It will come to you naturally from your heart. But for those who don't have that gift and that privilege, I'd like you to find text so that we might sing these beautiful, hopeful, comforting words together to begin the celebration. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. At this time, we'll hear some poems that the family has selected for us in this time of reflection, after which we'll hear some scripture. And then we'll begin a time of sharing with one another our remembrances of. So for now, we invite Ellen to come forward and offer the first.
Okay. It's an honor to share this poem by Margaret Mead, Remember Me. To the living, I am gone. To the sorrowful, I will never return. To the angry, I was cheated. But to the happy, I'm at peace. And to the faithful, I have never left. I cannot be seen, but I can be heard. So as you stand upon a shore, gazing at a beautiful sea, remember me. As you look in awe at a mighty forest and its grand majesty, remember me. As you look upon a flower and admire its simplicity, remember me. Remember me in your heart, your thoughts, your memories of the times we loved, the times we cried, the times we fought, the times we laughed. For if you always think of me, I will never be gone.
This is a poem called Instructions by Arnold Crompton. When I have moved beyond you in the adventure of life, gather in some pleasant place and there remember me with spoken words, old and new. Let a tear, if you will, but let a smile come quickly. For I have loved the laughter of life. Do not linger too long on your solemnities. Go eat and talk, and when you can, follow a woodland trail, climb a high mountain, walk along the wild seashore, chew the thoughts of some book which challenges your soul. Use your hands some bright day to make thing a beauty, or to lift someone's heavy load. Though you mention not my name, though no thought of me crosses your mind, I shall be with you. For these have been the realities of my life for me, and when you face some crisis with anguish, when you walk alone with courage, when you choose your path of right, I shall be very close to you. I have followed the valleys, I have climbed the heights of life.
I invite you to rise and body your spirit for the reading of the Gospel of John. Jesus said to his disciples, "As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. I have said these things to you so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." Gospel of our Savior.
O God, we pray that you might be among us and bring your love, that we might live in your love for one another. Amen. Please be seated. How's the sound? I have this anxious feeling that you can't hear. You can. Thank you. Sometimes you're up here and it's hard to tell. And I'm just going to say it. We said it when we were getting ready for the service. This sucks. Can we just say that and just get it up front? This sucks. This is an incredibly hard space to be in. We should have a celebration of Keith's life 20, 30 years from now. Not today. But here we are. Here we are. Because that's the world that we live in. People come to churches, to mosques, to temples, to synagogues in moments like this because life is bigger than we are. And as we struggle to make sense of it, we turn to old wisdom and to good faith to make our way through. And as we gather with you all, I would like to say there are three things that are going to be unfolding in this moment, in the days and weeks ahead, and then offer you an image that I hope might provide some comfort and some healing and some guidance. The three things are mourning the loss of Keith at too young an age. We're also gathering to remember this amazing person and all the lives that he touched. And we're here to let him go. Because the truth is, friends, we're only with one another for a time. And then we go our separate ways in the mystery that is life. Those three things are happening here. And they've been happening, and they'll continue on into the weeks and months ahead. The image I'd like to offer to you is the image of God however you imagine God. God as a weaver. God as a weaver. And if you can, I invite you to imagine a loom. A loom, one of those amazing mechanisms whereby threads are brought together and made into a fabric. And on one end of the loom are these separate threads. Each of us, our individual lives and being. And they come together in the mystery of God's creative power to the shuttle, which goes back and forth like time goes moment by moment. And with each passing of the shuttle, those threads come together and they form a fabric. The fabric of our lives, the fabric of our relationships, the fabric of our experience of this amazing and sometimes heartbreaking world that we find ourselves in. From our separate individual lives and God's unknown, we come together into this world. And then a loved one passes. And it feels like the fabric that had been woven alongside them suddenly tears because they're not there anymore. The shuttle is going, time is passing, but they're not part of the fabric of each moment and each day anymore. And it hurts. That's grief. That's the grief of losing a loved one. And what I want to offer to you is that these things, grieving, remembering, and letting go, they can actually all work with one another and work healing in our hearts and connect us with the greater mystery of life. Not only the unknown of where we come from, but the unknown of where we go to. We get a sense of healing. We get a sense of healing that grief by sharing the stories of how our lives were interwoven with our loved ones. And those stories can be especially healing and powerful if they highlight the beautiful high values that our loved one embodied and evoked in us. And that's going to be different for different people. Something that spoke deeply to the family and their life together might be true for them because of the privilege they had of journeying together. You might have had a different experience as a colleague or a mentor, a teacher, a student. But those high ideals, those things, that's what life is about, I would suggest to you. And when you remember how they manifested in your experience in this life, you might just catch glimpses of how they're part of the greater mystery of life, beyond the veil within which we live. The hope of people of faith is that at the end, life doesn't end, it changes. Life doesn't end, it changes. And it changes into something more beautiful and more hopeful. And it's these high values, these high ideals. That's the stuff that this greater fabric that we can't see, God weaves on the other end of time, at the end of our lives. Keith is a beautiful person. And in God's grace, Keith's not lost. Keith is found. And something still more beautiful is being woven with Keith and all of our other loved ones who we see no more. And maybe you'll get a hint of that in a dream. Maybe you'll get a hint of that in a flash of some unexpected memory, some beautiful moment. Maybe you'll get flashes of how life doesn't end. It changes, which makes the sadness and the grief worth going through. We're going to have a time of sharing stories. First hearing from members of the family, and then we're going to open it up. If there's a story that you feel moved to share here this afternoon, we invite you to do so in this sacred space. And as you gather at the Loring Greeno House, that is a great way to share your stories with one another. Because in that way, Keith in real ways lives on. and that hurt feeling binds up a little bit. And you realize that love is the final word. That's a frame around all that's happened. I do want to say a pastoral word before I turn it over to the family about grief. And y'all are bright people, you know. But sometimes it's still helpful to hear it, especially in the moment. Grief in every single person moves in its own way and in its own time. You can feel fine, days, weeks on end. Then some little thing triggers you, and you're in tears and brokenhearted all over again. And it's okay. You can be in sadness, deep sadness, and then some bright memory flashes and you're laughing. And it feels crazy. And it is. And it's okay. It's okay. You can find yourself months, even years down the line, having felt some peace, some stability, some healing, and then something comes up. And all that sadness pours out again. And it's okay. Everyone has their own journey with their grief. If you find yourself in a place where you feel stuck, which happens sometimes, that's when it's good to reach out. Reach out to a friend, a family member. If there's a trusted counselor, if there's a pastor you trust, or a rabbi, or an imam, to reach out to someone to offer support, to move through that stuck period, that stuck time. Because sometimes we do get stuck. And with help, we can get unstuck and go forward. And if you're someone who gets that call of someone needing to get unstuck, needing to talk to someone, needing to share the sorrow that's come back to them, take that call. Take that call and be that caring, loving, listening heart and ear that can be the difference between helping your loved one stay stuck or move forward through their grief. Because one of the lessons of Keith's life is to love one another, to care for each other. May we love and care for one another always. At this time, we want to invite the folks who are going to share our initial remembrances of Keith to come to the lectern. And after the family is done, the floor will be open for those of you who might wish to share something at this time.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. That was beautiful. It sucks, right? So this is not how it was meant to be. But the very beginning of what I started to say today just got changed. And so this is so typical of my life with Keith together. And so let me just begin by saying that a few of my memories that we met in Seattle when our labs went out on a Friday night. I'd been grant writing all day, so perhaps Keith heard my southern accent and thought we should meet. I'm not sure why. Next day, we talked science for 3 hours, got married a year to the day later. I found this out at our wedding that was officiated by Jodie Foster. And she said, we got married a year to the day later. And it's like, okay, fine, I'm glad to know that. I remember being very nervous meeting his Southern Carolinian father, mother, and understanding whether or not that family and his brother would accept me. That went okay, actually, in hindsight. Wouldn't you say, Mark? As to checking me out when I first went to meet the family. Our wedding had 8 family members and 200 guests. It's the his and hers guests, right? And I learned so much about Keith from his colleagues at our wedding. I had no idea who he really was in the past. I guess I still would have married him, but it was so much fun to find out about who he really was. I learned from his colleagues at Duke, then at Columbia with Fred Alt, George Yankopoulos, and then in Seattle from his Weintraub group, as I've named you all. I don't know if you know that, but I have. So you're the Weintraub group. And the 2 years that we were together in Seattle, we worked very hard and deeply explored the Pacific Northwest. And it was beautiful. And Keith was always in the lab. He would not get out. He would not enjoy this. He'd lived there for many years before he met me. And it was like, okay, fine, now finally we can go to British Columbia and go do things and camp and hike, and it was great. And our motto was never take the same trail twice. And that was absolutely true. We couldn't even go back. If we took a trail up, we had to go back down a different way. So that was always what we were doing. And our daughters, Kim and Ellen, were also raised in the same vein of they had to try something new every day. You could not have the same dinner. You couldn't eat the same thing. If we went to a restaurant, you had to order something different. Was very proud. Keith was very proud of the amazing, caring adults they have become, along with their spouses, Hale and Chris, and grandson, Tristan. Keith and I chose Turkey. Well, Keith actually chose Turkey for our honeymoon because neither of us had been there, and because it was culturally rich. Now, mind you, as we were going on our honeymoon, he did stop and print out his latest paper to work on the plane. I was a little bit offended by that, and maybe I should have known a little something there. So the other thing that happened is we were getting married. The closet fell in my daughter's bedroom about 2 days before the wedding. Whatever. So in the programs, one of my friends, Bernard, was printing the programs at the printer for our wedding, the day of our wedding. So this is pretty typical of, where are the programs? They didn't show up. We can accommodate, we can adapt because of all the people that you are. So thank you all for coming and for helping us through this. And for the readings, Laura and Ellen, thank you so much. And eventually we'll get the programs, I hope, and then you'll have them to take home with you. The four of us moved to Boston in 1993 and continued on our separate work paths. So for me, Keith was always at the forefront of scientific discovery, and this is important. We're going to talk about this again in just a minute. He started his lab at the CBR, again working with Fred Alt, and continued to be at the forefront of discovery at the Joslin Diabetes Center. He mentored many young scientists over the years and challenged each one to reach farther, dig deeper, discover more. And those of you who are here, wouldn't you say that? Those of you who have been mentees with him, wouldn't he make you, Jorge, wouldn't he make you go beyond what you could do, right? And just challenge you and challenge you and challenge you. That's what I think the legacy that he leaves, at least the way I know it, because I hear about you, right? And believe me, the Thursday morning group, George, I tried not to listen, but that's always in my mind too. Our lives continued to be filled with adventure outside of our work. We fell in love with the coast of Maine. We became very good kayakers. Keith could outdo me very well. Hikers and nature lovers with our Maine family, and some of our Maine family are here, so thank you all for coming too. And our children also came to Maine, and our doggies. And so we're a doggy family, right? We've had many doggies over the years. We love our doggies almost more than our children. Not really. So thank you all for being doggy people when you are, and for putting up with our dogs when you're not. And our traditions included good luck, New Year's Day, black-eyed peas, greens, grits, and ham, and invited our neighbors and amazing work colleagues, his and hers. So together, we learned about each other's lives as we came together over black-eyed peas, greens, grits, collards. Now, many of you did not know what grits were, and may still not know, because we haven't had the party for a while. And Southern traditions may seem a little odd right now in our country. So Keith also became an amazing chef. You all may not know this. I used to cook, but he really cooks, and often used the food lab, the cookbook. This is Kenji Alt, Fred Alt's son's cookbook, and so Fred, you may not be as important as Kenji now in people's lives, but just to let you know that you were always a star in Keith's life, and so was Kenji and his cookbook. So I would encourage you, if you're a scientist and you ever need to cook, especially if you're a male scientist, I don't want to be like really male-female here, but If you are a male scientist, you will enjoy the food lab, so use that as your cookbook. We love our JP neighborhood. Today is a great example of our JP neighborhood. It's historic, it's eclectic. Thank you so much for your comments. We're sort of ecumenical all around the world, and they're filled with kind and caring people. This is an amazing neighborhood to live in, and there are an increasing number of doggy people who live here too, so we also like that. So I just want to say that Keith's illness progressed fairly rapidly over this past year. So our adventures were fewer, but did include an amazing time in France with our daughter Ellen, and a great Thanksgiving with our daughter Kim, Hale, and Tristan. Keith was fighting his own scientific battle with his disease and developed his circle of Dana-Farber myeloma researchers, MDs, and NPs. I would especially like to thank all of the doctors and especially the nurses who took care of Keith for the last 6 weeks of his life at the Brigham as he moved from floor to floor as his disease progressed. And I mean every word of that, because you guys know, if you're listening, that I wouldn't go home. I wouldn't leave unless I was certain that he was in good hands. And I made the residents and the interns on call me at 6 in the morning and 11 at night, just to let me know how he's doing. And everybody did that. So I so appreciate that. And now here's my plea, and that's that I would like to ask each of you, however you knew Keith, to continue to fight for science and discovery in these very challenging times. Make this Keith's legacy. This is a time when science is under attack, right? Especially at Harvard. So we're very proud of the fight that's going on there. I am very proud of the fight that's going on there. Don't let science flag. Don't give up. Please keep on the legacy for Keith to continue science as a passion and to always discover the unknown. So keep up the fight, and at the same time, be kind to everybody. Kindness is important. And when you meet somebody, look at them, talk to them, look at them in the eye, and ask what their substance is, where they come from, how they're here, how they care about you, and how you know each other. And please, 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 do not let science flag. We have to do this. I'm too old to keep up the fight myself, but many of you are right there with me. But encourage everyone else to continue the fight for science. I so appreciate your being here today.
This is so like me, and Keith would forgive me for this. I forgot to put it up first. There we go. So, yes, I'm Ellen. I'm Keith's daughter, for those of you that haven't met me before. Again, thank you all so much for coming. And along with what you were saying earlier about the tapestry, before I tell you the bits that I meant to say, it really reminds me of, and I don't know where it's from, but I love it, this idea that we die twice. The first time when we breathe our last breath, and the second time when the last person speaks our name. So please keep speaking about Keith, because he stays alive in us and in our voices and our stories. So I look forward to hearing your stories and hearing his name for a very, very long time, please. Okay, so I knew of Keith, before I met Keith. I was heading to summer camp for the very first time. It was a very big deal. And when my mother dropped me off, she mentioned that she had a date that evening with a guy named Keith. Now, that by itself was a big deal because I never really heard about my mother having dates. At the time, I thought that was because she didn't have dates, but really, it was because she didn't introduce us to people that wouldn't potentially be a part of our lives. And so I wasn't quite sure that I liked Keith when I got back from my week at summer camp. And my mother was not picking me up. It was Laura that was picking me up because my mom was out on a weekend trip with this guy named Keith. But not long after that, we got to meet Keith. and my mom was absolutely right. Keith was terrific. And I knew he had real potential when my mom went away for a work trip, and Keith brought us pizza. Now, this could have been a ploy for brownie points, but it wasn't because he never told my mom. So, granted, Keith absolutely loved pizza, and he wanted someone to eat it with him, but he also wanted to meet us and learn about us, and the fact that he didn't tell my mom meant a lot to both me and my sister at the time. He always treated us like adults and like people. He never treated us like kids. Keith picked all of us to be his family, and that was huge for me and always has been, because he had a choice in wanting to be part of our lives, and he said yes. Keith never used the words, "because I said so." He never demanded things. He explained, he answered questions, he talked about options, supported as best he could, and he worked in the background to help us make our best choices for our best lives. Keith didn't always agree with the choices that I made. I still remember him hanging out the door when I was getting in the car to go off to the army going, "You can still change your mind." But he always wanted to know what my world was like and what I believed and how I felt about the things that mattered most to me. And when my path was so often very different from the regular road that most people take, and even when it varied from the softer road that he would have perhaps wanted for me. On the very, very, very rare occasion that I did not actually make the best choices, I never heard Keith say, "I told you so," and he never tried to explain my mistakes to me. And on the few occasions I did really, genuinely, truly need help, neither of my parents judged me for it. They simply stepped forward and said yes. That is my family, and that is what Keith taught me, all of us. And perhaps more than anything, that love is not transactional. And while we may not say it all the time, and we're not a huggy family that spends every weekend together, we do show our love through action every day, both for each other and for those around us. And Keith taught us that in a very real way. Keith's love was evidence-based and results-driven, and his actions mattered. He thought about so many things. He tried to see all sides, and he always did what he truly felt was right. And I believe that both he and my mother and my sister have a big part in my own stubborn insistence that what is right and good and fair and kind is simply the way that the world should be. Keith brought these lessons to each of us in so many ways every day. And for that, I am truly grateful that he said yes to being my father and spending the little time that he had with all of us.
That's hard to follow. So I met Keith when I was 15. It was weird. Despite what my sister says, I remember my mom dating people. She dated people I didn't like. They were boring. They had boring jobs. They were insincere. They liked money. And then I went off to summer camp. My summer camp was longer. I left earlier. I came back later. And she and Keith picked me up, and I was like, whoa, who's this? Anyway, it was a little weird at first, but he was really interesting. He was curious. He was funny. I was 15. I like computers. He had a really cool screensaver. That was awesome. He liked learning things. He would teach me things. I would tell him what I was learning. He was interested in that. Yeah, that was great. I think the thing that he taught me I'm crying just because I'm remembering him, not for this particular part, but he taught me that men can be considerate and supportive and gentle. It's not really something I'd seen in my life before then. I mean, except for like maybe occasional like PBS series or something, you know, where there's like some old 100 years ago nice gentleman, but Keith was a gentleman. Yeah. So anyway, I lived with my family for about 2 years. Then I left because I was old. I was a teenager. So I got married. I had a kid. My spouse, my kid, right there. So we all talked about how we remember Keith, and so I'm kind of talking for them too. So I asked Tristan, my kid, what he thought, and I wanted to quote something he wrote, which is, Keith always put other people ahead of himself and often cared more for others' happinesses than his own. And he was the most selfless person I knew. So I kind of lived with Keith for a couple of years, but it's been a long time since then. And so most of the time that I have with him has been vacations. And so that's visiting him in his house in Maine, or having my mom and Keith come over for Thanksgiving every year. And so I remember, you know, he liked to cook. He liked grilling. He could even grill pizza, which is not a thing I knew you could do. He liked kayaking. He taught us how to kayak. He was strong and fast. I remember him teaching Tristan when he was 6 how to work the paddles. Every year in Thanksgiving, he would cook the turkey, cut the turkey. We'd go out for maybe a show because we live in New York. And he would always make time to go run in the park. And he had these funny shoes that had like individual slots for the toes. You visit his house and like there's the funny shoes on the mantle. And he was always working on something. He was always working on a paper or always working on a grant. And so I want to share that was a huge part of his life. And so people here who knew him as a colleague, you were a huge part of his life. We would be in Maine for 6 days or something, and a couple days would be he's working on something, right? So it was always a big part of who he was. But he was also really funny. He had great deadpan humor, which is really funny with a small kid trying to figure out, like, wait, is that ridiculous thing you said, is that true? Or should I not? If you were lucky, he would wink at you, so he'd tell you know he was joking. He was also really easygoing and stress-reducing, which is funny. This showed up all the time. So like, you know, again, vacation metaphor. Should we go out hiking or should we go swimming? And that's a surprisingly stressful decision. Everybody has opinions, and he just kind of helps navigate through that and makes things easier. And he was always like that. It's hard to imagine not having him there to help. I saw his research. We talked about his research like every day. This was who he was. These were some of the best conversations I had with him. They're about various types of biology. And like, I'm a programmer, so I don't know this stuff. And so I would be like, oh, it's like this. And he'd be like, instead of saying like, yeah, no, not at all, he would say, yeah, and that idea is really actually more like it manifests in this way. And then you can connect these ideas and they go into this way. And I would learn things, and he wouldn't talk down to me, but he would also make me feel like I was adding to his thoughts, which I wasn't probably, but it was, I can imagine what it would be like to have him as a mentor. Again, I asked my immediate family for thoughts about him, and they both really highlighted that he loved research, and he wanted to make a difference through people and also through his work. I think one thing that's worth sharing with everybody, a few times over the last year or so, he mentioned that his current project is the best time he's had in his whole life, and it's the most important work he's ever done. And so remember that, but also remember he said that not just in the last year. He kind of felt like that a lot. Kind of all the time was the best time in his life. And he was always really excited about the thing he was working on, and it was it had a lot more potential, and it was it was great. So I just want to say, I think it's important that so much of Keith's life was his work, because his work is still alive. His papers are still there. They're still being cited. They're still being read. They're still sparking new ideas. And the mentorship that he gave with people and the support that he gave to people, you guys are still taking these research programs forward, and you'll continue to do so, and then they'll branch out into other things and change, and they'll mix with other things, and it'll be like this tapestry thing. And so I think if you use the tapestry metaphor, there's a thread for Keith, but that spawned so many other threads for what he cares about and what he works on, and everybody else is now bringing those forward. I think there's really no better way to spend a life than to take your thread and not just touch other people and their threads, but make new ones that they carry and bring forward. So yeah, I appreciate him. I learned a lot from him. Thank you.
Do I need the box? It helps folks see. Okay, good. Okay. Hi, I'm Keith's brother, Mark, and Keith was, excuse me, Keith was such an extraordinary brother, such an extraordinary human being, and so kind and so generous, and the most amazing brother you could possibly ask for. There's really no way to sum up him in just with a lot of adjectives, but you guys were amazing, and everything you said, it really touched me and rang so true, everything, because it's easy to talk about him in such a way because it's all true. I was trying to think of what to say, and it goes back so far. It went back to my first memory in life. My first memory of Keith, which is my first memory in life, is a musical thing. Keith would be down the room, appropriately studying in his room, and he would be working. It was probably when he was, this would be the late 60s, and I was just a little bitty kid. And he would be in his room studying, and I would ask him, he would love to listen to music when he studied, and I would ask him, he would play the Beatles a lot, and he had, my favorite song was Yellow Submarine. It's really the only song I liked when I was 3 or 4 years old, I guess. And so Yellow Submarine was towards the end of the first side of Revolver, and so when he would put that record on, I would ask him to come down the hall and tell me when Yellow Submarine was going to come on. And so he'd be in his room studying, and then he would come down and say, Mark, come back into the room. And so we would listen to Yellow Submarine together. So that's my first memory in life. And sometimes he would play it again for me. So this is all just sort of sums up his generosity and his kindness and interrupting his work, basically, to let me come in and him share something with me. And our entire relationship was about sharing things. And it started out with him being 8 years older than me, with him teaching me and sharing with me. And I can't imagine another brother being so generous. It was just extraordinary. And that went on for years and years and years. And for some reason, the whole listening to Yellow Submarine in his room, when I think about it now as I've been collecting my thoughts, it doesn't seem like that long ago. It's very strange. Time is very strange. And when we found out that we were losing him and he was leaving and he was going away and that he wouldn't be with us any longer, it was devastating to me. It was unbelievable. How can you process something like that? How can you even process it? It's like he's not going to be here. Where is he going? And I'm talking about when he went to college to Duke, and it was it was 3.5 hours away. It was insane. It's just like, my mom, we would drive him to college, and it was 3.5 hours, 4 hours at the most to Durham, and we would cry on the way back home. My dad would be driving the car, and my mom and I would be crying like, oh, when are we going to see Keith again? And little did I know it, but that was the beginning of him opening up my life to the world being such a bigger place, because I flew on an airplane for the first time. The first time I ever flew on an airplane was by myself to go visit him, and from Greenville, South Carolina to Durham, North Carolina on an airplane. And literally when I got my wings, because Eastern Airlines would give you these little wings, so they put me on a plane and gave me the wings and let me sit in the cockpit for a little while. And so it was Keith that gave me my wings to start with about traveling. And so what other brother would have 8 years old, have their 8-year younger brother come and spend the weekend with them at college? It was really extraordinary. And he treated me, and I've heard other people say this too, he's treated people like equals. It wasn't like he talked down to you, and I felt like I was such a cool guy up at the college meeting all his friends and his fraternity and everything that he did there. And I went to class with him, and it was extraordinary for a 10, 11, 12-year-old to be able to go to a class at Duke and hang out with people at Duke and have a birthday party at Duke with all of these great people that he introduced me to. And that continued when he went to New York. He went to New York to go to Columbia Medical School, and that opened my world up in a whole different way. I started flying up there a lot, and he would send me, it's so funny, he would send me these errands. Like I would be 13, 14 years old, and he would go to class, and he would tell me to go on these errands. He let me roam around New York City when I was 13, 14, 15 years old. If our mom knew it, she was a real worrier. She would really have freaked out. But we kept it kind of down low. And he literally gave me boundaries, because he would give me a map, and he took a pen, and like a red pen, and he made a box. But it was a big box, but it was where I should not go. And so I never crossed the line. It was always a line around, and I would go around New York, and I never crossed the line and go outside the box, and I was good. But he would send me on these weird errands, just like, and everything was about me learning something, it turned out later. So he would say like, oh, today I'm out of bagels. It's like bagels. And I didn't even know I learned what bagels were at that point as well. But he would send me on an errand to go get bagels at Zabar's way downtown. And I realized later it was just and he would say like, oh, I need a pound of pastrami from so-and-so deli. And I realized later he was just sending me on cool New York errands so I'd learn about New York. And that's something that stuck with me forever. Later I lived in New York, and I would always, every time I saw Zabar's, I would think about these great memories of Keith. And he taught me all these things. I learned from him. And I started reciprocating back. It's interesting that, Sandy, you were saying that you guys went on these trips into nature and everything, but he hadn't done that before you got him to go do it, even though he loved that kind of thing. He loved music, and he didn't just go out on his own to see shows a lot, but as I got older, I was a huge music fan, and I would go to New York and get him to take me to all these shows. And so we saw all these historic shows. We saw The Clash at Bonds and Times Square, and we saw Blondie in Central Park, and we saw the Ramones on the Pier, and we saw Talking Heads in Forest Hills Tennis Stadium, all my favorite bands. And I don't think Keith would have gone to those shows if I hadn't have talked him into it. So I would fly up there and talk him into going to these shows, and we would have a blast, and we had so much fun, and we had so many adventures. Then we started going overseas. My first time overseas, there were so many firsts. My first time overseas was going with Keith. We went to France, we went to Italy. We also went to British Columbia. We would take these week-long trips. And once again, who takes their 8-year-old younger brother on a week-long vacation to France? It was so much fun. He was so generous. And he was just beautiful, and he was so kind. And it was amazing how much he shared with me. And everything was also a learning. It wasn't just goofing around. Everything, like I said, was some sort of learning experience. Everything was something that made a difference in my life and enriched me and taught me something. And I think we started doing that back and forth. As I got older and got involved in writing and in the music world, I mean, we went on very different paths. We could not have been more different in many ways, and we couldn't be more alike in many ways. And he would introduce me to like Nobel Prize winning scientists, and I would introduce him to Bono of U2 and stuff like that. But we really appreciated, we both appreciated that reciprocally in a beautiful way. When he went to Seattle, I continued to visit him. When he came to Boston, I continued to visit him. He visited me in LA, and we continued to take trips. He continued to share things with me. In LA, he would come to the Worm convention that he went to, and I would go into the parties there for the Worm convention and out with his lab, and just he shared with me everything. And I sat in one of his classes. Everything. There was nothing he would not share with me, and there was nothing I would not share with him. I could go on and on and on about the things we did together, but the most important thing about it is just his kindness and his generosity, and the way he treated me and the way he treated people, and I'll lose it if I talk about it too much, but it's hard to process losing him. It's almost impossible. It's surreal to me right now. I'm still in shock after a few weeks. I'm still in shock. But there's something in my head, and you alluded to it, like what's next? Where do we go? It's almost like it takes me back to that beginning when he went to college. And I was, as a little kid, I wasn't just joking, I literally thought, where is he going? Am I ever going to see him again? And he opened up the world to me. But maybe there's some cosmic thing, some universal thing. We don't know what it is. But he's still with me. He's still with you. He's still with all of us, however we want him to be in our hearts. And I'm looking forward to him being on whatever the next step is, and him showing me and opening up my world to that. And I loved him so much, and I miss you, Keith. And like, let me know when Yellow Submarine is played. I don't know. It's just like he'll always be with us. And thank you so much. And Sandy and Ellen and Kim and your families, thank you for everything you did with him, and for giving him the family that you gave him. And we were all blessed to have him in our lives. Thank you.
So friends, at this time, we'll open the lectern up. if you are moved to share your story of Keith, your remembrance of Keith, we invite you to come forward and do so. There are many of us. We won't all be able to speak. So shorter might be sweeter in these moments, although goodness knows there's a lot to tell. And as we move through the time, I will be your MC and will monitor the time for us all.
I didn't plan to say anything, but Keith was a very dear colleague of mine. He was one of the first people. We both started at the CBR about the same time. He was already there. And he was, my name's Judy Lieberman. I'm a scientist. And I had, Keith was actually my best friend on the faculty when I was started at the CBR. And we had, and everything his family said is true. There was never a mean idea or in Keith's head. He was the most generous, kind, and giving person. But he was an amazing scientist too. We had, Keith was actually responsible for my working on RNA interference. We had many discussions. We were in different fields, but we kept having sparks and ideas that related, say, metabolism to immunology and what he was doing to what I was doing. And our conversations were just like scintillating. And, and I can't actually think of anyone else who I had such scintillating scientific conversations with. And Keith was actually responsible for my working on RNA interference, because when the Fire and Mellow paper came out in worms, I was just intrigued. I didn't understand what was going on. Nobody understood how it worked. And I kept going back to Keith and saying, how does this work? What's known now? And that's how I got involved in trying to harness this new biology into therapy. And it's become a therapy. There were 6 approved drugs, and there'll be many more. And Keith was also generous. My son actually worked in C. elegans. He was very generous to Eric and wrote really nice letters of recommendation. And, Keith will live on in me as sort of the idea of the primary essential scientist and what a scientist should be. Thank you.
So my name's George King. I'm from Joslin Diabetes Center. I just want to echo all the comments. I'm really lucky for me and Joslin to have Keith join us 2004. I found him to be a great scientist, great colleague, and a great friend. As a scientist, I never liked oxidative stress. But he actually explained to me how it works and could even be important. He was a great colleague because he was associate research director for over 10 years. And every advice he'd given us every Thursday morning that we have an 8 o'clock call was really, really important. It's always generous, as everyone said, and never self-centered, and for the greater good of Jocelyn. He was a great friend. We reminisced about Duke, Maine, and about his gambling trips to Las Vegas, where he they picked him up in the airport in limos, right, Mark? And one year he came back incredibly excited because he won enough money to buy a Audi TT, right? I'm gonna miss him a great deal, and thank you for inviting us.
So I'm one of the neighbors from Maine, and I'm a historian by trade, but I enjoy hearing scientists talk about what they're doing. So that having Keith and Sandy move onto our block in Maine was a wonderful experience. We didn't know it was going to be a wonderful experience, but they had dogs, and they would walk the dogs, and because a dog is an introduction to Susan and my life, we went out and met these nice people with their dogs. And we may have mentioned a TV show or something. Nobody in our community has a TV except us. But there was a rap on the door one day, and it was Sandy, who you all know about her horse racing world and the Kentucky Derby and her family's important role in it. She and Keith wanted to watch the Preakness, and they didn't have a TV. We did. Now, I've got to confess that I'm the son of a Methodist minister, so gambling and horse racing were pretty much off the table. But they came, and I thought, gee, you've got to have a special drink. And we didn't have whatever they drink for the Preakness, but we had bourbon and sugar water and wonderful groves of mint outside our kitchen door. So we made, I'm blanking all of a sudden, that horrible thing that happens when you're 80, mint juleps. And thought they were wonderful. And from then on, I always associated mint juleps with Keith and Sandy. But the other thing that was wonderful was that Keith and I both cook. And he did mention this Food Lab cookbook to me, and I decided that it would be a great Christmas present for my wife, which I could use. And so I did. But then it turned out that Kenji Alt's dad had invented the drug that keeps Susan's vision going. So there's that little connection that made me delighted. But Food Lab, if you don't have it, I don't got a cut, but it's really worth having on your cookbook shelf. And one last bit, you've all heard about how perfect Keith was in so many ways, but the five-toed sneakers were just not great. And so I've got to add that. And then finally, I read a little bit about Keith when we learned that he died, and I saw that he was working with nematodes. And I thought, my goodness, what a coincidence. I had just bought 1.5 million of them to attack the Japanese beetle grubs in my yard. And I thought, boy, it would have been great to be able to talk to Keith about maybe a different type of experiment that we could work on. But anyway, all I want you to know is they were a lot of fun. They are a lot of fun. And we have loved having them as neighbors and friends. And we're going to keep after Sandy for a long time.
Hi, I'm Ron Kahn. I'm another colleague from the Joslin. And like others, I wasn't really planning to say anything, but I just felt it was important to add to so many of the wonderful comments that have been made. As George said, Keith came to the Joslin in 2004, and you might say, what is a guy who works on worms going to do at the Joslin Diabetes Center? You know, they do make insulin, but they don't have any blood. They don't have a pancreas. You know, what are you going to do? And at the same time, I can say he added so much to the intellectual environment, to the scientific environment, to the mentoring of his fellows and students who he adored, but also to the balance that existed as we have, like every institution, you know, lots of stressful things, and Keith was part of this leadership group that always brought balance, thoughtfulness, I would say kindness to a leadership kind of role that you don't usually see in many people. Also, with being a little bit from the South, we could relate to the grits and to the mint juleps for sure. And we could also relate, I think, to this joy of life that Keith expressed, because as you've heard from others, everything he did with quiet but great passion and a great personal involvement. So I just want to add one thought to what the Reverend said at the beginning about what's the next step. And I'm Jewish, and some of you may know or not know that in the Jewish religion, we don't believe in heaven or hell. We believe in the Jewish religion that you only live on in the thoughts that people have of you. And so in that sense, Keith will live on in our thoughts in a positive way that is the greatest afterlife he can have. And we will miss him. Thank you.
My name is Reed Pakila-Worley, and I just wanted to take 30 seconds and say something on behalf of the worm community, which you've heard so much about. We are a proud group of scientists that use C. elegans biology to understand basic principles of life, and Keith was incredibly important to that group, to our group. And I talked to him last summer. He was the keynote speaker at this important meeting that he's gone to. And I said, have you ever missed one? And he said, I don't think so. Maybe one in 30 years. And I will really miss him next summer in Madison.
Hi. My name is Jorge Castillo Juan. I'm the most senior fellow in Keith's lab, where there are 3 of us, but there are also students and other members here in the church. I met Keith in 2014 before I joined his lab finally in 2016. And I got to know many aspects of him. The first meeting with him, I was terrified. And I was coming for my interview, and I was before at Cold Spring Harbor, coming to Boston after a meeting where we were both attending. And I ended up having the longest interview you could ever have, because he offered to drive me back to Boston. And I felt that I had to say yes, because he was my prospective mentor. So, but Mike is here. Hi, Mike. The fellows that were in his lab, there were 2 of them that were driving back with him. They asked me to drive in the front seat with him, and I was so terrified. I said, oh my God, this is a 4-hour drive. What am I going to talk for 4 hours? And it turned out that we were both geeks for papers, for scientific papers. So those 4 hours flew. And I knew instantly that if I could speak with someone that I didn't know, and a scientist that was going to be my professor, if I was going to be with anyone for the next stage of my career, it had to be him. And that was kind of something that carried on, because then when you're a trainee, you have these one-on-one meetings where you have to show data. And you feel a lot of pressure when you have to show data to your mentor. And I remember the first time that all of my experiments failed, and I was so very nervous. And I went into his office. That was, for me, a terrifying place at the time. And I sat down and I had to tell him that I had nothing to show because nothing had worked. And he said, "That's all right, tell me what you've been reading." And we started, again, geeking about papers. And that was the first time that I felt like, oh my God, this is the place where I want to be, because he loved that. And in the end, it was one of my most memorable meetings with him, just talking about what was happening in the world right now and how we could bring that into our lab. And then as time progressed, every time I would go into a meeting with him in his office, it would be different. And towards the end, especially during the pandemic, I had a very hard time with my mental health and some other problems that were happening. And I got to see a Keith that was extremely kind. At that time, like soon after the pandemic, it was the time for me to start thinking about what was going to be next. And I had serious doubts about what I wanted to do. And it was actually Keith lifting me up, saying me, "I think you should carry on with this. You are a person that should continue in academia." That gave me that sense that no matter how times are hard right now, that I still want to do this some way, one way or another. And to the trainees that are left, me, Paulette, and Faye May, I think Keith wanted us really to carry on his scientific legacy and his work with our unique views, but also like with intertwined voice that he gave us with his mentoring and scientific perspective. And I would also like to take a moment to thank his family for sharing him with us. I know we were a great part of his life, getting those texts at weird hours or emails at weird hours. I know he was with you most of those times, but he was also thinking about us. And lastly, I want to share that right at the beginning of March, it was my last really long conversation with him, and he was really looking forward to a lot of things that were going on in the lab. And yes, he was very excited about that last project with Faye May and with Ron. So I think we owe it to ourselves and to him to carry on, and as he was saying to Paulette all the time, to keep going. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lu'ay Abdelkarim. I am Keith's immediate neighbor, and I'm not going to talk about Keith as a scientist. I'm going to talk about a neighbor, and he was an amazing. We moved in 10 years ago, and Keith and Sandy welcomed us with open arms. Keith not only showed his kindness, which everybody commented about, he also showed his attention to detail, his consideration. So as a Muslim, he'd invite us over with my idiosyncratic food requirements, my idiosyncratic lactose intolerance. He made sure that that was all accommodated for without letting me know. It was just wonderful. We'd be invited to his parties every Christmas, and off we'd go. He was also kind to everyone. I noticed a succession of the cleaning lady, the handyman who started at our place, would go end up working there as well, which at first was a bit challenging, but eventually we realized that Keith spoke to everyone and was the sort of person everybody felt comfortable with. At some point, we had kids, and Keith and Sandy got a koi pond. And you took the risk of letting my 3-year-olds walk over whenever they felt like and to feed those fish. And I was impressed, astonished, and terrified, and deeply grateful. So Keith is physically not with us anymore. But one day we will get that fence fixed. But his spirit, what he gave us, what he gave the neighborhood, what he gave me, welcoming me, my wife, and my family into this part of JP, that's going to last a long, long time. It's amazing to discover that there was a whole different side of science that I had limited knowledge of. But it just deepens that appreciation for what we had. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a retired scientist. My name is Rafi Kupan, and I trained with Keith and enjoyed his friendship for many years. For those of you who are not scientists, it's extremely hard to do what Keith had done, to train as an immunologist, to get a medical degree, to work as a molecular biologist, to develop methods to look at what kind of DNA proteins bind, get a job, and then switch a system to nematode genetics. And doing this usually takes a sabbatical or a postdoc, so you could train on someone else's money and someone else's time. And if you don't succeed, then you go back to what you did before. But that's not how he did it. He did it on his own, in his own space, at his own time, and he did it extremely well, as you just heard. It is one of the hardest things you could do in science, and he successfully had done it. I don't know what comes next, but I've heard the Dalai Lama express his views on heaven and hell. And to him, it was all here on earth. If you were a small-minded man, a jealous person, someone who always believed that people are out to get you, and who always preempts that, well, you made your life a living hell. But as you have heard, if you're a generous person, if you're kind, if your heart is big enough for everyone, if you share your time and your love, you live a heavenly life. And my friend Keith lived a heavenly life. We're all better off for having known it, and we'll not forget him. I wish, though, that when he did feel like giving me a present, it would be something other than a Harvard hat or a Boston Red Sox t-shirt. Thank you.
Maybe on a lighthearted note. I met Sandy when we were both on the interview trail for fellowships. And I didn't get to know, and then our paths sort of came together and we were colleagues. I didn't get to know Keith that well until they moved to Boston. But very soon after they moved to Boston, Keith showed me that he was my hero. And very quickly, he became the person that I could call in the middle of the night to get rid of the dead mouse in my basement. I just could not do it. So Yes, he was a brilliant scientist, he was generous, he was all of those things, but to me, he was my hero. And for the next steps, applications are now open for whoever I can call to get rid of the mouse.
As we draw our time of sharing to a close, know that this is ongoing. And if you're able to gather, please share with everyone. We'll end this time with a reflection from our musician, Harrison. Ice cream with 22 folks, 22 households, and after the reflection, we'll end the service with our
Friends, I invite you to stand for the common issue. We come to the mystery of death at the end of life, and we bid farewell to those we love, but will see no longer. We come to this point treasuring the love we have shared with Keith, and we do so in the profound hope that love is stronger than death, and that the mystery we stand before it is that at death, life changes and does not end.
So we entrust Keith into that mystery, even as we mourn our loss, in the hope that, for him, the journey of life continues, and that we, in time, will be reunited with him when our life crosses the threshold of death and changes. May our tears water seeds of hope. May we see signs of the greater life that surrounds us all unseen. And may we know that at the last, it is love that is greatest of all things.
And together let us say, Amen.
Amen.
With that, our service is ended.